Isaiah chapters 47 to 49 today, and this opens rather uneventfully with God talking to the Babylonians, or speaking about the Babylonians, that their days are numbered, which we already knew. Verse 2, I thought I would read to you, just for these examples periodically of just how weird this stuff is. I'm going to need the keeper of the book to bring my big old birthday Bible. I'm not sure where. So chapter 47 verse 2 reads, Take millstones and grind flour. Take off your veil. Lift up your skirts, bare your legs and wade through the streams. Your nakedness will be exposed and your shame uncovered. I will take vengeance. I will spare no one. And that sort of thing, you're kind of left with, great, okay. So we'll just move on. We then have a sort of accusation against someone, and it's you lover of pleasure. And it reminded me of Monty Python, where it's talking about your father is a hamster and your mother smells of elderberries. You know, of all the insults you could be on the receiving end of, it's you lover of pleasure. Okay, yeah. I guess this ties in that idea of highest values. If you love pleasure above all else, then it's probably a hiding nothing, which is probably true even in secular terms, or even actually is obviously true in secular terms even. But I go vaguely amusing bit. We then have God saying to someone, stuff is happening, and then he says, in spite of your many sorceries and all your potent spells. And this ties back to something I picked up on originally back in Exodus, when Moses comes along and turns a stick into a snake, and then the sorcerers manage to do it and they turn water into blood. I was like, I beg your pardon, are you seriously telling me that there are magicians going around doing actual magic? And it's been largely quiet on that front since Exodus. I mean, little references here and there. But then suddenly coming with God saying that sorcerers are real and potent spells are a thing. And yeah, well, I'm still very sceptical journey face on that. And it's difficult to know what else to do with it. I mean, it's just, I don't even know, is that the Bible saying that that stuff is real? I mean, I sort of assume it is. But yeah, I'm definitely not ready for that still. So again, we will move on. We then have another example of how God speaks sometimes, saying something fairly straightforward, but it's not literally true. And I think these are worth sort of checking in on periodically, because this whole idea that the metaphorical speech is easy to lose track of. But it's God saying, for I knew how stubborn you were. Your neck muscles were iron, your forehead was bronze. And you know, obviously your neck muscles are not made of iron and your forehead not made of bronze. So that's God saying something fairly straightforward that's not literally true. But it does make it really difficult when what he's saying is literally true, but he's, you know, is that a metaphor or something? It's just so difficult to know what to do with it. We then have God handily sort of stating that actually all these predictions are for proof of his existence, which is really handy. But you are then left with the problem, is like, well, is it very good proof for existence? I've come across this idea that this talk of the Bible was written for us, not to us. And I think that's in the modern sense. I think it's the right way around. The idea that obviously it was written a long time ago for other people at that time, or to other people at that time, and now we still have it, so it's useful for us. But, you know, as proof then, would it have made... I don't think it really makes a lot of sense as proof now, especially within the book of Isaiah predicting the Babylonian exile, because there is a question mark over whether some of the book was written after the Babylonian exile anyway. But even in those days, would it have been useful proof? I mean, he's still predicting the Babylonian exile a couple hundred years away, I believe, at this point, that Isaiah's walking around. So, I mean, maybe a great-great-grandfather is going to look back and go, ah, yes, Isaiah, some walking around person. And there's no internet either, so half people surely haven't even heard this stuff. I don't know. And maybe it's spread more broadly because it's had a couple hundred years to do that. And then you think, oh, wow, that's good. But you're still stuck with that problem of prophecy. It's very difficult. Anyway, we then have God talking about a couple of things that he does basically for his own sake, which is, okay, so what would God do for his own sake? There are two things. The first one is he delays his wrath, or wrath, or I'm English, so maybe it's wrath, I don't know. I don't actually know how to pronounce that. It's not a word that gets used very often, so you read it, and in my head it says wrath. But so it's delayed anyway for some reason. I guess this is, in Isaiah's time, the Babylonian exile is coming in a couple hundred years' time or so. So that's the delay. Not clear why necessarily. And then he talked about testing people in the furnace of affliction. So we previously established that affliction is seen by God as necessary for life. But this then helps back that up. Okay, that wasn't just a sort of a fluke mention or something. This whole idea that affliction is an important thing is clearly a thing. We then have an interesting repeat of God saying that he created everything, which seems kind of obvious when you're God that would be part of it. But this is something I put into the Adam and Eve video when I redid it. It was sneaking an extra little point I hadn't thought of at the original time I read it. Is it true that the Abrahamic religions, or the Abrahamic God, is the only one who claims to have actually created the universe from nothing? I'm aware there are other gods, obviously, or claims of gods, but something like Thor or Marduk or whoever it is, as far as I'm aware, their story doesn't even include them creating the universe, or time, or existence. Therefore, by definition, they're calling themselves God, but it's lowercase g. They're not actually claiming to be God. They're just powerful creatures or whatever. Or Zeus, another one. I don't think Zeus is supposed to have created life and the universe and everything, at least not from nothing. And it's interesting when you get that argument that Ricky Gervais seems to be quite fond of. And it's on face value, it's a really good argument. You're like, oh yeah, yes, yeah. And he's saying he only believes in one less God than Christians do, because he doesn't believe in Thor either and all the rest of that. But the point is, nearly all of these, as far as I'm aware, aren't actually claiming to be God at all. They're just characters who are very powerful, who have the title of God. So you've still got the problem between Judaism, Islam and Christianity, because they've still got the same Abrahamic God, and which of them is right. But to some extent, you can rule out everything else as not even claiming to be God, I think. If anyone has any thoughts on that, it'd be really interesting, because I couldn't find one when I Googled it. It depends how you word it. They come back and, oh yes, was it Marduk created this from something, the carcass of something else, or something like that. Weird stuff. But the point was, the universe was created from something that was already there. So God is, in this context, talking about creating everything from nothing. I don't think that necessarily matters if it's the only one claiming that, but it's an interesting idea, and I think it was certainly something I perceive quite differently from how it seems to actually be the case. We then seem to have these switching between God speaking, or being quoted by Isaiah, and then Isaiah speaking, and the transition between them is, well, it's not obvious half the time. You have to really sort of concentrate to pick it up. That's not really a complaint, it's more of a just sharing that with you. I mean, if you're interested in what the Bible's like to read, that's one of the challenges. We have God anyway talking about someone, or to someone, but which sounds a bit like Jesus potentially, but in the context, it's almost like he's talking to Isaiah. But he talks about this person, I will make you a light for the Gentiles, that my salvation may reach the ends of the earth. It did occur that, are there any tenses in Hebrew? And potentially, because it sounds like it's talking about something that happened now, but supposedly referring to something that's going to happen in the future. But no, Hebrew does have tenses, so I think it's just, whoever's writing this is just having a field day with us and messing around with talking 1 minute about Abraham and the next minute talking about something that's hundreds of years away yet, but all in the present or past tense. We then have a massive idea, but in a very short sentence. It talks about, I will make you to be a covenant for the people. So this is again talking in that weird tense about, potentially about someone to come. I think about someone to come. And you think, okay, well now we know the whole New Testament bit, and that does fit the whole Jesus story very well, so there's no getting around that. But you think back then, this would have been absolutely baffling, because he's talking about a person being the covenant. And previously we've had things like, if you do is you follow my rules, and it will rain and you'll have the basics of life. Great, there's a covenant. We then have the Noah one. There's the one-sided covenant where he's saying that never again will I destroy humanity with a flood, regardless of whether you keep your end of the bargain or not. We now have a person as a covenant, which is almost like a clash of concepts in that how can you have a person being a covenant? And yeah, sure, it's explained later on. You insert the Old Testament, you insert the New Testament, and suddenly it's like, okay, that's what it means. But at the time, people reading that were like, what? There's a person coming along and they're going to be a covenant? So it doesn't make... There was an Eddie Izzard line where he talked about sentences that made no sense. He was saying, you put spoons and rule space. It's that sort of thing, isn't it? In that context, without the New Testament to clarify what that actually means, people are like, what? That doesn't even make sense as a collection of words. But there we go. And then finally, we have lots more talk about God being Redeemer. That does seem to really shift the tone of this, from how it certainly was in the old days, all this talk of redemption and punishment and things to come, where things are going to really move on. The whole Isaiah thing is very, very different to what's happened before that. So, yeah, difficult. That's why it's taken so long to get through the book of Isaiah, I suppose. But on we should go anyway and see what's next.